Hi there, and welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers memory care and is finishing up work on some assisted living and independent living units up on Rolling Bay. If you'd like to find out more about the programs or schedule a tour, call 360-689-4314. and learn also about their day stay and respite programs. Today, we are going to be talking about genealogy with the Bainbridge Island Genealogical Society, and we have some folks here to introduce us to that. I want to mention first, though, that we are meeting, as we all do every day. We live here on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and we are grateful for their hospitality and friendship. So let me introduce Larry Nodell, who will talk to us a little bit about what we're going to talk about today regarding genealogy and genealogy here on Bainbridge Island.
Okay, Reed, thank you very much. And I want to start by thanking the Senior Center for the opportunity to have Biggs tell you a little bit about what we do. And I'm going to start by having you meet the rest of our presentation team, Sue Hassan-Miller and Andrea Hoskins, and perhaps Susie Wood, who's having a little difficulty connecting. And if not, we have a pinch hitter who has prepared for this possibility, Betty Weiss, who would be joining us. So let's just start with Sue Hassan-Miller, and some of you may know Sue at the Senior Center because she's been involved for a long time and is actually one of the founders of Biggs back in 2005. And so she's been involved in the organization for the last 18 years. So Sue, why don't you get us started?
Well, good afternoon. And I'm currently now just the membership co-chair, where we help all our members get what they would like out of our group. And I'm also a member of the Senior Center. And so, Andy?
My name's Andrea Hoskins, and I am currently the president of Biggs, and I joined about 7 years ago. And this is where I'm supposed to hand it off to Susie, who is having trouble.
All right, why don't you just hand it off to me and let me ask.
Back to you, Larry.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so the question is, why genealogy? You know, when first we encounter genealogy, we seldom have any kind of long-term goal in mind. Rather, we simply get started in some very specific ways. For example, you might get a DNA test kit for Christmas, or simply want to know your ethnicity, or perhaps find some particular ancestor. This is a great uncle of mine who was an embezzler. So I use this to suggest to you, you don't want to do searching unless you are willing to live with what you find when you do the search. And finally, some people get involved because they're interested in proving or disproving a myth that it occurs in their family about what Uncle John once did or something like that. But others, like me, start out with a simple question and end up with a lifelong activity, because genealogy is a little bit like doing a huge jigsaw puzzle. It has to be worked without knowing what the end is really going to be like. And and like a jigsaw puzzle, you put in a few pieces and you can find yourself hooked. And that's what happens when you get involved with genealogy and begin finding some of those fragments of your family story that you didn't know existed. Now, membership in genealogy is absolutely optional. It isn't necessary to be a member to be involved in genealogy, and that's especially true today when so much information can be found online. Online genealogy services like these have made family research much easier than it was just a few years ago. And then there's libraries like our own Bainbridge Public Library, which offer not only books on many aspects of genealogy, but completely free use of computers with access to several of those important online services. Still, there are some very real benefits to being a member of an organization like BIGS. We have a friendly community of like-minded individuals where we can both learn and be inspired. For example, our monthly meetings most often have professional genealogists speaking to us on a wide variety of genealogy subjects. These inspire us to tackle new or unfamiliar research techniques and teach us genealogy best practices. But informal sharing can also produce learning. Members sharing with other members their family stories, successes, and failures can result in moments of insight, which can both instruct and inspire. In fact, in a nutshell, BIG's reason for being is to help each other and help others find their family stories. Now, please notice I said help. We do not do genealogy for others. Our mission is to help others learn how to do genealogy themselves. So why genealogy? Well, it's all about finding family stories. And everyone has family stories, but unfortunately, everyone doesn't know them. Some think their ancestors weren't important enough to have their stories recorded, but we are often surprised at the amazing details we can learn about supposedly unimportant people who left their paper trails hundreds of years ago. And these stories are truly survival stories that are well worth learning about. Think about all of the wars and plagues and droughts and other disasters that have decimated humanity over the ages. You and I only read about those things, but our ancestors actually lived through them. And that's the only reason we're here. And discovering those stories can be quite satisfying, as you will soon see, because my fellow members are going to tell you a bit about their family histories and what genealogy has meant to them. And first up is Andy Hoskins.
Thanks, Larry. So I'm Andy, and I joined BIGS back in 2016, within a year and a half of retiring from the Central Kitsap School District. I've been working on ancestry.com for a couple of years at that point, but I realized there was a lot more to genealogical research than ancestry. I wanted to learn about other sources of information and how to make use of them. I saw a flyer for BIGS posted at the library and decided to try a meeting. And at that first meeting, I joined BIGS and began to learn a great deal about genealogical research and how to find sources to confirm my findings on ancestry. Now, I happen to like to do research, and I thoroughly enjoy spending a rainy afternoon diving into newspapers.com or reviewing my most recent DNA matches or investigating my hints on ancestry. In fact, I got started on ancestry on a gloomy gray winter day. I was talking with my roommate, college roommate, Susan, on the phone. We'd met in San Jose State back in 1968. And I mentioned that the weather had me down and I'd run out of mysteries to read. And she said she'd recently discovered ancestry.com, and why didn't I give it a try? Maybe I could find a few mysteries of my own to solve. She said she'd had some success tracking her father's family back to the early days of the colonies. I thought that sounded fascinating. So I immediately got to work. And in a week or two, I'd figured out my paternal grandmother's family had been early to Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And I found records that showed that they'd helped establish a town of Hampton, New Hampshire. And that was in 1638. As I kept digging, I learned that there was a founder's park, and you can see that pictured here, dedicated to the families who'd first settled the town. And then I found a photo showing that the parks had large memorial stones, each engraved with the name of a founding family. And I eventually found that map that charts the names of the families. And I quit looking, for my families. I came up with the Batchelders and the Tilton families that I knew I was related to. But also on the list, to my amazement, was the last name Marston, the surname of my college roommate. And it turns out we have common ancestors who had journeyed to the colonies together as part of a small Puritan congregation following their pastor. And it's the unexpected discoveries like this that keep me coming back. Knowing more about my ancestors helps me feel more connected to the history of our country and makes me appreciate the strength and determination of the folks that have made my life possible. So one of the first things Biggs taught me was to set goals for my research. And I decided my first goal would be to find the first immigrant ancestors for each of my grandparents' surnames. And I've tracked my mother's and maternal line back to the Mayflower, to a young woman named Mary Chilton. And you see, she arrived in 1620, and according to that illustration there, she was the first off the small boat that brought them in from the ship they came on. And my father's paternal line back to Jamestown. I learned that all four of my grandparents' surnames came from ancestors that arrived in the early days of the colonies, and that I descend from multiple patriots that took part in the Revolution. My research uncovered for me the diary of my four times great grandfather. His name was Jehiel Stewart, and he took part in the siege of Boston in the first days of the Revolution. I was able to find the diary because his wife had turned it into the federal government in order to prove her rights to his pension, that she had been married to him at the time of service. And it was noted in his diary, his marriage. So I found it because I learned at Biggs how to look for pension records. One of my concerns of late has been how to share all this information that I've collected. And I've created what I'm calling ancestor portraits for each of my grandparents, putting together their history with pedigree chart and photos and letters and whatever I might collect. It's in a newsletter-like format, using just Word on my laptop. And with the advent of Zoom meetings, I now meet quarterly with my maternal cousins, and I'm able to share with them my research and my newspaper articles and the photos I've uncovered since we last had a chance to meet. So for me, that's why genealogy. And now it's time for you to hear from Sue Hassenmiller.
Thank you. I really got started for my 12th birthday when I received a Rand McNally World Atlas. It became one of my favorite books. I spent hours dreaming of the places to visit, including Potenza, Italy. That's the home village of my father's parents. I often wondered what it would be like to visit it. And while I knew where my paternal ancestors came from, the only thing I knew about my mother's family was that my grandmother's mother came to the US from someplace in Sweden. I knew I wanted to visit that place and all the other places my mother's family came from, but I really didn't know where or how to do that. The list of places to visit stayed with me stayed throughout the years as I finished my education, started a career, got married, got divorced, never having the time to find out about the rest of the family history. Fast forward to 1979, when I returned to Seattle, met my current husband. He owned a house in Hawthorne Hills in Seattle, just east of the university. And from the deck of the house, you could look down and see the buildings on Sandpoint Way. I found out that one of the buildings was the National Archives, which housed a lot of historic records. All the thoughts about finding out where my mother's family came from became a real possibility. But how? I took an afternoon off from work and went to the archives. There I learned about the type of records at the archives and how to access the information. But I still did not know how to go about researching family history. At the archives, I saw a flyer for a meeting of the Seattle Genealogical Society. I attended the meeting and learned from the members how to research my family history. This was back in the days before computers, when you had to write to the places for the records and then wait until the information came back. Or as I did on my vacations, I traveled to the locations where a member of the family lived, visited libraries, newspaper offices, cemeteries, and any place where my family lived or created records. Knowing that some of my ancestors came from foreign places, I also visited Ellis Island to look at the immigration records. After my husband and I moved to Bainbridge, traveling to Seattle for the Seattle Genealogical Society meetings consumed a lot of time. So I was very happy when I read in the Bainbridge Review that a group of people wanted to start a genealogy group on the island. I could not resist getting involved to help start the Bainbridge Island Genealogical Society. And we have come a long ways from where I started researching by snail mail and visiting places, although visiting is still a good idea, to the computer, the internet, and the availability of records online, and to DNA testing. Gradually, the facts added up and I started to travel to the family ancestral places. Of course, Potenza was one of the first places. There I met family members who shared my surname, found the last house my grandparents lived in before they came to the US in 1900, and walked in the old parts of Potenza where my grandparents walked. Next came a place in Germany called Espesheim, near Mainz. That's where my mother's paternal grandmother's family came from. A small town surrounded by vineyards, built in 700 AD. The records show that my family has lived there since the 1500s. The cemetery was populated with family members. The next place was Johnstorp, Sweden, which was the home of my mother's maternal grandmother. It is a former fishing village located on the western shores of the Callan Peninsula, now consisting of modern houses and an old restored captain and fishermen's houses. It has become really a popular resort area. Along the way, we visited ancestral places of my husband's family that I also researched, such as his Swedish family that has lived in Jedermark, Finland for over 200 years, but they still consider themselves Swedish. It was easy to visit various places in England, as his Mayflower ancestor, the Soule family, has been well documented by the Mayflower Society. And during the pandemic, we were contacted by my husband's 8th cousin who lives in Germany and has added 3 more generations to my husband's German family line with her research. We will be visiting her this June when we complete a Danube River cruise. The hardest of the family lines to research was my mother's father's family, the Campbell line. The earliest known ancestor was born in 1789, but due to the lack of records during that period, this line was hardest to track back across the waters. But with the help of DNA testing, the newest research tool, I was able to solve the mystery of where my Campbell family came from, which turned out to be Tyrone County, Ireland. This discovery has led to 2 trips to Ireland. And however, I'm not finished. Since I have not been able to locate and visit the Swedish home village of my mother's paternal grandfather, my research will continue. So why genealogy? Without it, I would not know where my mother's family came from. I would not have visited their home village, learned how they lived, and why they came to the US. I would not know my heritage. And now do we turn it over to Betty or Susie
Well,
back?
let's see. Thank you, Sue. Betty, are you in a position to start?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, let me share the screen again, if
Okay.
I may.
In the meantime, I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm Betty Weiss, and I joined Biggs in 2008 as a new retiree. I was looking for community and I was looking to learn about genealogy, and I got involved with the board shortly after. So I've been in a number of positions, and I'm currently education chair. Are you ready for me to start, Larry?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I really enjoyed thinking about, so what does genealogy mean to me? And it means friendships, it means travel, it means serendipity, it's connections with extended family, it's learning and discovery. Tracing ancestor steps has found me on a Rotterdam, Netherlands street corner where my Dutch grandmother worked as a young woman before she came to the US in about 1907, to a street in Mountain Ash, Wales, where great-grandparents Ruth and Thomas met before their 1863 marriage, and to a Montana homestead walking the property where my dad grew up in the early 1900s. So my dad is a boy, and he's the little person in white, because in those days, little boys dressed up in white clothes, and he's with his brother Edwin, and they're before an uncompleted homestead in November in 1911 in Montana. One moment of serendipity was hearing an archivist in the National Library of Wales reading from an 1873 letter that was written by a Welshman in Ohio to his brother in Wales. And he's writing about his neighbor in Gomer, Ohio. And the neighbor was my great-grandmother, Jane, and it was about Jane becoming a member of the church. So this illustrates the relationship between Llanbermere, Wales, which is Cymru, is how they said, and Gomer, Ohio. Three families from Llanbermere established Gomer in 1883, and there's still a very strong Welsh tradition in Gomer. Another moment of serendipity happened while I was visiting a cousin. From his basement, he brought out an album of family photographs that had to have been taken in the early 1900s on the Nez Perce, Idaho homestead. And I realized that the old camera that had been in my dad's memorabilia all these years had to have been the camera that took those pictures. Thus, the camera and the album were reunited at my house after about 116 years. I guess I like best the detective work. And this is where I've done most of my digging. And Larry's going to there. So I love sleuthing in old red tape. And I don't know if folks know that supposedly the origin of the term red tape comes from the red paper ties that were done around government packets of paper. So there you actually see red tape, which led to that notion of red tape. So my favorite, one of my favorite topics is my grandfather, David Pugh, and he was born in 1864 in rural North Wales. And there was always some information about his mother, Jane, and about a couple of his brothers, but there was never anything in the family said about David's father. Years ago, my sister tried to do the research and find David's father, but she didn't have any success. And then my brother stumbled on a key to unlocking some of the secrets when he was visiting the National Library of Wales in 1988. And he was looking at census records and baptism records. And what he figured out was that Jane Pugh, mother of David Pugh, was the direct Pugh connection. She hadn't married into the family. She was the direct line. And so that really sort of then put us on a new track for searching. He also discovered, my brother discovered the baptism records for two of my grandfather's older brothers, both of whom had been born out of wedlock to their mother, Jane. While I've not yet found David's father, my unknown great-grandfather, I'm certain that he was born out of wedlock. Jane married a man 12 years her junior in London when David was a young boy. And with that man, Mr. Reiley, she had another 4 children. She emigrated from Liverpool, England, and arrived in Gomer, Ohio in 1873 with 3 children, including my grandfather, David. This is my great-grandmother, Jane. She is my favorite research subject. I can't tell you the number of hours that I have spent looking for every scrap of information about Jane, her family, her friends, and her neighbors in Wales and in Ohio. And as my sister once said, I have traveled to every place where Jane would have planted a footstep. I have a deep affection for Jane as I come to know more about her. She was born in North Wales in 1833. She was the youngest of 4 children of a poor farm laborer and his wife. Jane was 19 when her mother died, and about 5 months later, as an unmarried young woman, she gave birth to a son. She was again an unwed mother at ages 22, 26, and 31. She lived in a small village, so everyone would have known of her situation. I have researched online records and information, visited archives and museums in Wales, England, and Ohio. I attended a church service in Welsh in Jane's Church in Wales. I found areas where she lived in London, Liverpool, and the house that she was living at the time of her death in 1907 in Gomer, Ohio. So due in part to her grit and determination, I'm here today to share a bit of this journey with you. What is next? I will use DNA tools to continue the search for clues to my unknown great-grandfather, and I want to learn more about Jane's life, what it might have been really like in Wales and in Ohio. So why genealogy? It's a wonderful community in which to connect with like-minded friends and contribute by helping others. I love learning new skills and laughing about some of my missteps, like looking sideways at a microfilm because I didn't know the machine could be turned upright. I like mastering aspects of records research while uncovering more mysteries to explore, like why did they do that or how did they do that? Genealogy offers puzzles to solve with the joys of progress when pieces fit together. All these ancestors are a wonder to behold as I gain wisdom about us as people. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Betty, and thanks for pinch hitting. That was terrific. So last time I'm going to ask the question, why genealogy? Because I keep giving the same answer. If you probably noticed, it's all about discovering those family stories. You can do it yourself, and we can show you how. You learn skills and find facts that are both challenging and rewarding in the comfort of a welcoming, like-minded community. Finally, finding your roots can change who you think you are. And I can say that based on personal experience. 5 years ago, at age 80, I discovered my birth parents, and I have enjoyed an ever-deepening relationship since then with my newly found 95-year-old sister and the rest of my true family relatives. It has been one of the major highlights of my life. A final word about Biggs. You can find out about anything you'd want to know about our organization, as well as links to many useful resources on our website, bigenealogy.org. And any one of you would be welcome to any of our public meetings. On the third Fridays at 10 a.m., we have expert outside presentations at the library or on Zoom as you prefer. And on the fourth Mondays at 7 p.m., we have a program we call Tree Builder. It's a coaching session where we have a number of members of our society at the library to help anyone who comes in with any question whatsoever about genealogy, all free of charge, of course. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, I thought Betty's story about Jane Pugh was perfect, as we were talking a moment ago about how International Women's Day is coming up. Talk about somebody who obviously had a lot of grit and determination and proved that a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. So I think that's the kind of story that also brings to life other historical readings. I just finished reading a book in my book group, Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran. It's about the Osage in Oklahoma. And, you know, he, like you guys, spent a lot of time pouring into records, basically being a genealogist reporter. And so there must be a lot of overlap, either frustrated or wannabe reportage that goes on with the work of genealogy.
There is an enormous amount of overlap between history and genealogy. I didn't know that until I got involved, and the more I learned about the ancestors I never knew I had, the more it ends up taking me back to try to find out what their lives were really like. And you can't do that if you don't study history. I mean, living in rural Missouri in 1835 is not like living in the state of Washington in 2023. And you have to be able to understand at least something about what that period was like if you're going to understand the decisions that you find those people made.
And I was also intrigued about the idea of how, I guess there's some serendipity when you find, again, Betty's story about the letter that mentioned her grandmother. I mean, how did that fall into your hands?
Well, just the backstory a little bit is I was in the National Library of Wales and I was looking for something and they couldn't find it for me. So then they got one of the senior people to come and she said, no, we don't have that particular resource. But do you know about the Edward Peat letters? I said, no, I don't know about the Edward Peat letters. So they had a collection of letters written by a man named Edward Peat from Gomer, Ohio, to his brother who still lived in Llanfairmere. And she said, would you, and it's all in Welsh. And she said, would you like me to see if I can find any references to your grandmother, great grandmother? And so she did. And then she translated it for me and sent it home with me. And now some of it's online translated. So that's how that, but that's total serendipity.
Well, and generosity.
And generosity. Yes.
You know, finding people who are willing to actually help you on the trail,
Yeah.
people that don't otherwise have any reason to maybe help you. Have you have the others of you experienced that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, I was going to mention to you something that happened to us. We have a program called Q&A, which we were running before we had Tree Builder, and we received a request from a woman who lived in California to find out something, if we could, about her great-grandfather who was a fisherman on Bainbridge Island in the 20s, in the 1920s. And she knew that he had left, but she was trying to find out where he lived. And I thought, you know, well, sure, we'll try to help. But I thought, you know, this is not going to be easy to do. And I went to the History Museum, and in a strange series of events, I found a letter that someone had written to, is his name David Price, the guy that wrote the book on Blakely Harbor. I can't remember his last name. Anyway, she had written a letter to him because he had written to her to get some information on her family. And it ended up that this was the very family that this woman in California was looking for. And I could, just using my phone, take pictures of this letter and send it to her. And it led her to a living relative who was alive in and living quite well in Seattle, and brought the two of them together. And it was all because of one small 6-page handwritten letter that was laying in the files at the History Museum. And that anyone would ever find a use for that, is just ridiculously, 1 in a million. And things like that happen all the time, I have to say.
Reed, I was just going to comment that one of the things I enjoy doing that gives depth to the stories is using newspaper articles. And right now, Ancestry has developed to the point where it's connected with newspapers.com. And with the right level of subscription, you can go from one to the other. And I have found any number of unexpected articles about relatives because of the ability to link to newspapers.com and see what they were up to when they were visiting friends in Nebraska or flying on the China Clipper from San Francisco, or things you wouldn't know about their story unless you found these little details recorded on in newsprint.
Yes, and when I guess, Sue, it was you that was talking about having an Irish connection that you didn't expect. It made me think about, then when you happen to read a novel that takes place in turn of the century Ireland, you kind of put yourself in the shoes in a way that you might not have before.
Absolutely.
On one of the trips to Ireland, we actually were able to see a house where ancestors lived in the 1700s. And it was very interesting because one side of the house sloped down, and that's where they kept the cattle and the pigs, probably the chickens, during the winter time. And so it was they were living with the animals. But it was
It's a lot warmer
interesting to
that
see
way.
how they lived.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Andrea.
I just said it's a lot warmer that way
That's right, for everybody.
for everybody.
So let's see, I have a question here from Giannine. Is that how you say your name? She says, my paternal grandmother was born in a small town in Italy to an unwed mother. The father was not on the birth certificate. Have you any idea of if that's the kind of thing that one could ever track down?
Yes, I've spent quite a bit of time doing Italian research, and there were an awful lot of children born out of wedlock, and also a lot of children that died. In fact, when you go in there and you look at the death records, it was just kind of appalling. And one of the things I found out in doing the research, and I don't even think my father knew about it, they had 3 children that had been born but died in Italy and didn't come over. They just came over with the one daughter. And I don't think anybody in the family knew that until I was really digging into the records and found their death records.
So there are connections that you may or may not, like, I think, like Larry said at the beginning, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and you may end up without all the pieces, or like Betty was saying, you can, I think it was you, or maybe it was Andrea, that you can continue to look and be surprised, and oh, I can fill out this collection if I just find who that person was. Go ahead.
The other thing we could mention in that case is DNA, that learning about how to use your matches in your DNA to find cousins that may then lead you to a family line that would give you that father's name. So there are ways, depending on who's tested their DNA.
There are ways, but no guarantees. Yes, sir.
Reed, if you want to give Janine my contact, I could help her with the Italian.
Okay, that's great. And that sounds like exactly the kind of things that might happen at Biggs all the time.
Mhm.
And she did say earlier, she's been researching her roots for a long time and is looking forward to joining you. So I'm sure that your connection will be better, and I'm happy to share your personal contact information, Sue. But again, it's the website is BI Genealogy.
Right, .org.
Yes.
And so that's a good place if you can't remember anything else today. That's a good place to start to find out. You
Right.
just-
If anyone would like to go to bigenealogy.org and go to the contact page, there is a link there to contact myself or Andy, either one of us.
Okay. So the first order of business, of course, is to learn how to spell genealogy. So,
True.
although thanks to Google, a general web search will probably get you there. Thank you guys very much for spending the time and for sharing your stories. I am intrigued and impressed, and I'm glad that there's such a lively group on Bainbridge, and I hope you continue to thrive.
Thank you.
Thank you.